So Michael Ross has more than a decade of science education experience from positions in nonprofit museums, including the Connecticut Science Center in Hartford, the Children's Museum, formerly the Science Center of Connecticut in West Hartford, and the Discover Museum in Bridgeport. In these roles, Michael has developed and facilitated programs which include topics on robotics, environmental remediation, computer science, geology, alternative energy, and electronics. Additionally, he held hydrogeologist positions at 2 environmental consulting firms in Connecticut. As a hydrogeologist, Michael was involved with soil and water remediation, map making with GIS and AutoCAD, groundwater aquifer modeling, geotechnical soil borings, and remediation system troubleshooting and maintenance. Michael holds degrees in both geology and environmental science from the University of Connecticut. He is currently the environmental education coordinator at Dinosaur State Park in Rocky Hill, part of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection State Park System. No. Awesome. You can go ahead and get started, Michael.
And so I thought today I would just give kind of like a little background about my kind of career path that was expressed to me that may be something of interest to you. And also a little bit about my experience at in the environmental consulting field and also in the education field as well. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully everything will work. All right, so can everybody see that that PowerPoint slide there? Yes? See some
Yep, we can see.
Perfect, thank you. So my path to get to where I am was kind of an interesting one. And in terms of like geology and environmental science, before I get there, these are some of the degrees that you would likely need to have for some work in the environmental fields. There's 2 types of or categories of degrees that somebody could focus on if they were interested in environmental science. And by the way, I'm not looking at the camera because I have a secondary screen over here, so that's why. So we have geology, and then we also have environmental science degrees. And I'm not going to read all of them off to you, but you can see the geology degrees and what those entail, and the environmental science degrees. Now, when I was in college, I was actually first focusing on education, and so that was where I started as a freshman. And as I got through my first few semesters, I was looking at some of the coursework that I would take in my future semesters, and I was thinking to myself, you know, there's a lot of teaching classes, and although I do want to learn about teaching, I actually want to learn about what I'm teaching probably more. So at that point, I shifted into environmental science because that was kind of the best degree for the general science field, because it incorporated a lot of different sorts of fields of science. And so as I was going through my senior year, I looked at the requirements and I realized that if I just took one more course, then I would have a degree also in geology. And so I took that one extra course, and so I graduated with both a degree in environmental science and a degree in geology. And although that's not necessary for everybody, it really helped me out a lot in the different fields that I held. So these are just some of the degrees that somebody could focus on. You'll notice underneath the geology degrees, I have in civil engineering and CAD work, or computer science. Geology and environmental science to a degree, it's not all about being outside, because after you collect the information, after you do the work on whatever you need to do outside, then you need to tabulate it, you need to display it, you maybe need to make a map, you need to design something. So there actually is a lot of computer work that is beneficial if you know how to do these things. GIS, the Geographical Information System, making maps, and also that computer-aided design there as well. And then there's also engineering components of each one of these, and I'll get a little bit into the engineering components with the progressive slides. So now a little bit about how I got to where I am, and that is the environmental, it's a long term, what is it? Environmental coordination, environmental education coordinator at Dinosaur State Park. My first job when I was about 16 was at a science museum. This was in high school, the Discovery Museum. And I know you don't know these places because all these places are in Connecticut. Then I went to UConn. And again, I graduated with 2 bachelors of science, one in environmental science, the other one in geology. And I worked summers at the Discovery Museum and also the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, doing something amazing, collecting mosquitoes. And so we had to do that because we had a lot of, before that time period, there was a lot of Triple E, Eastern equine encephalitis, West Nile, those sorts of things. And so the state started a mosquito surveillance program. And I was one of the technicians because I was in high school and I could get out and going into the wetlands and collecting these mosquitoes in the traps. And I also loosely identified them once we got back into the lab. I just pulled out whatever were mosquitoes, because those were easy to tell, and I put them into a container, and then other people would identify them. And I don't know, Carrie, you can just shake your head, but does everybody here know Larissa?
Yeah, yes? She's okay. Everybody's boss.
Okay, all right. So when I was collecting the mosquitoes, she probably hasn't talked about this, but I was the one that was collecting mosquitoes, and she was the one in the lab that was actually identifying the males and the females and the species. So I did all the grunt work. All I had to do was identify mosquitoes, and she did all the intricate work identifying the males and the females and the species. All right, so after that, my first job after college was at the Children's Museum, and that was for 2 years. And again, I was kind of an educator there, and I got to work with live animals, those sorts of things. But as some of you realize with your first job, whether it's after college or before college in high school, sometimes it just doesn't pay enough. And I really loved the job there. I was making, it was called, what was called permanent part-time. And so I got about $9 and some change. And I was making roughly $16,000 a year. And this was after college. And I still had student loans. Granted, they're not as much as they are right now, but they were pretty significant. I loved working there, and I didn't really want to leave, but my mom actually said to me, Mike, I think you're becoming complacent. And I'm like, oh, what does that mean? And am I really? And so I thought about it a little bit, and then I looked at some of the other jobs that people I had graduated with or people I knew, and one person was working at T-Mobile, a cell phone, as a salesperson, and they were making twice as much as me. And I'm like, but I went to school for this stuff. So what's the difference here? I'm happy that they were. So I started to look at environmental consulting jobs because that's really where my degrees were. And then after that, I did get a job at a company close by to my house, which was good. And at the time, this was entry level. I was making about $36,000. That's what I started at after that job. So it was good for me. And I also was living at home at the time. And everybody has their own opinions about this. But for me, it worked out really, really well because I was charged the minimal rent and minimal utilities. I did help my parents out with it. But I was able to save a lot of that money that I was making there. And that really helped me later because when I got married, I needed to get a ring and all that kind of stuff. And so I was able to draw on my savings from that. But I also, when in getting a home and a car and those sorts of things, it helped me out a little bit. So if anybody ever asks me for my opinion on whether you should live at home or not, I say yes, as long as your family arrangement works out. But I know that question was not solicited here, but that's okay. All right, then after that, I worked at the Connecticut Science Center for 6 years. And there I learned a lot about formal education and how to develop really good classes using the next generation science standards, which are new sort of the science standards, national science standards, and made some contacts in the formal education field. I really enjoyed working there also. But after about 6 years, and this does happen, sometimes your supervisors change, and that change is not really good, and it's not beneficial for you. And so what was happening was that I was a manager at the time there, and I was doing my managing responsibilities, but my supervisor would say, no, you have to check with me on everything that you do. And so I started to do that. And then eventually it turned into, I should be able to make these decisions on my own, and therefore I'm not a good manager. And everything was being pushed onto me. I'm being honest with you because this does happen. So after a few years of this occurring, then I just needed to move on because it was not a good situation for me to be there. Even though the people there are great, it's just sometimes these things happen, and you do your best to work it out because you enjoy the job, you enjoy the people, you enjoy the work. But sometimes it doesn't work that way. So after the Connecticut Science Center, I got a job in another environmental consulting company at GeoInsight, and that was for 4 years. I don't know if you can see a pattern here. It's environmental consulting, education, environmental consulting. Now, when I was at the Science Center and looking for a job, I was a little bit concerned because on my resume, what are people going to see? What are the hirers going to see? I'm here for a little bit, I'm there for a little bit, I go back and forth. And so that could potentially be a drawback if you're preparing your resume. But these time periods, the 4.5 years, 5 years, 6 years, the way that things work now with society and with corporate, that's about how long people stay at these places. They change for various reasons. Sometimes it's for money, sometimes it's not. But for right now, this is the way that things are going. Now, if you were looking at jobs back 20 years or so, they may not hire people that change jobs every 5 years because they want you to be there for that long amount of time. But with the way society is right now, it's just not working out very well. So people need to transition. So, but they actually appreciated that I had this education experience because they were looking for somebody to mentor or train the people that were coming in, and so they hired me for one of those reasons, and also my experience at the other environmental consulting company. So I really enjoyed working at GeoInsight, and the pay was decent, the benefits were decent, but I really, really enjoy working in education and working with the public and helping people to learn about their environment and those sorts of things. So not that I was unhappy at GeoInsight, not that things were bad, they were not. If I was going to stay in environmental consulting, that's the company I would stay with. But I started to look for other opportunities, and I probably applied to 20 different positions over a period of 2 years, and got to in various degrees of progress in the interview process, and I just wasn't getting any of these jobs that I was looking at, and I started to get a little frustrated and discouraged. And so I was thinking maybe I should go back and get a master's. Maybe that will help me to do this. But you notice that I don't have a master's, but I couldn't figure out what it is. I have a lot of interests. I also like computers and electronics and those sorts of things. So this position I found on Indeed, and it looked really great, and it looked like it was going to be very, very competitive for me. I knew that I had the qualifications and the experience to do it, but I applied for it anyways, and long story short, out of 174 people, I was the one that they chose. And so that was a really exciting thing for me, and I'm having a lot of fun there, even though I'm actually not at the park right now. The park is open, the exhibit center's closed. They still have some staff up there maintaining the park area, but it is a lot of fun, and I'm hoping to be able to stay here for a while. So that was kind of a lot, but I just wanted to show you that in today's world, it may not be a straight shot to where you want to go, You may have to go back and forth a little bit, and there's no one way or right way to do it. For example, if I had not worked in the Discovery Museum when I was in high school, then maybe I would not have gotten a job at the Children's Museum, and then I wouldn't have gotten a job at the Science Center. Or if I didn't leave the Children's Museum when I was after those 2 years and work in environmental consulting, then maybe I would still be there kind of struggling and not have the experience that I gained working at the other positions. So I can look at it both ways. I can look at it 100 ways. I can look at it one way. As you're going through this and trying to figure out what you want to do, or if you have a job and you're wondering if this is where you want to go, there's not one way to do it. And I didn't necessarily plan this either. Sometimes it's very difficult to plan. So you kind of have to do what's best for yourself. Listen to the people around you that love you and that care about you. I don't mean to be like nostalgic or anything like that, but it's true. People want the best for you. So listen to your family and friends if possible. And because sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you can't really see what you need to do to move forward. It's kind of like that old saying, you can't see the forest through the trees. But if you were to back up, then you could see the forest, then you could see the path, that sort of thing. So before we go on, does anybody, well, yeah, I guess I'll wait for the questions. So if you have any questions of this, you can put it in the chat, and then we can talk about it at the end. All right, these are some pictures. That first one is me holding a snake when I was at the Children's Museum. I was a lot younger with a lot more hair. And then that bottom one right there is when I was at GeoInsight. One of our team members just happened to snap that when we were at a lagoon. It was basically an old landfill. And they thought it was such a great shot, and so they used it in their marketing materials. But you can only see the back of me, which is fine. All right, some of the fields having to do with geology and environmental science, obviously geology, and that can entail petrology, which is looking for petroleum products or coal, those sorts of things. Hydrogeology, which is looking for water and water resources. When I was in college, one of my professors said there's really only two ways to make money in geology. One is with the black liquid, oil. The other one is with the clear liquid, water. And that's probably true. Everybody needs water to survive, and the global society needs oil to keep going. So it's just an interesting insight that he had. Geotechnical engineering, that's basically looking at the ground to test, measure, assess what is needed in order to build buildings on it so that the buildings don't crack and fall. Water resources remediation, cleaning up oil spills and other sorts of contamination. Worker safety also, it's not just with rocks, but also making sure that we're safe. GIS, AutoCAD, the computer aspect to it. Evaluating environmental risk of properties for potential buyers. For me, there's some interesting aspects of this, and then there's also, for me, some boring aspects of this. But this actually works very closely with realtors and banks and insurance companies going into a facility and looking to see where the risks are. Were they doing this right? Could there be a spill over here? Or could this have been released? Or have they been dumping in other locations? And then drillers, and the drillers are needed in all environmental fields. They will drill environmental borings for environmental assessment. They'll drill geotechnical borings. They'll drill water wells. And most of these fields do require some sort of degree or certificate. The drillers, though, they don't. And if you don't have a degree, or if you have a different degree and you've been thinking if college is right for you, sometimes it's not, and that's perfectly okay. And so you could do drilling, and drilling is not just the grunt work of going out there and drilling the holes and all that sort of thing. It's also doing logging. By that I mean logging the borings and identifying what sorts of soil you have there or rock that you have there, those sorts of things. So drilling is actually a really interesting career to get into, and there's always a need for drillers. It is very physically taxing, but it is rewarding, and I know a number of drillers that really, really enjoy what they're doing. They enjoy what they do. They may own their own companies. They may work for somebody else. But if you enjoy being outside and a little bit of a challenge, then that's something you should look into as well. And then also surveying and mapping. And you don't necessarily need a degree for surveying and mapping either. You do need a license for surveying, at least in Connecticut. And in other states, you may need a degree, but a lot of times you don't. You can get that license, and then you can go out and survey and generate those maps. All right, this is just some quick examples of some things that I've done in the past. I have not specifically done this project. This was just something I found online. But basically, this is what I refer to as aquifer modeling. You go out, you collect information about the soil, about the ground, the water levels, you put it into this program, and then you can generate these 3D representations of water in the ground. Now, why do you think that it is important to be able to predict how the water will behave in the ground, to come up with these 3D representations? So this is the time when somebody can answer if they want to. Why do you think it's important to be able to represent or predict how water is going to behave in the ground?
I think there's a few things, like it tells you like how it's going to respond to like flooding activity, as well as like if like a pollution were to spill, you can tell like how fast it's going to like soak into the groundwater.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. So you can model the surface water, and then you can model the groundwater, the interconnection between the two. Very good. So modeling where plumes are going to go. What about like on the clean side of geology? That's kind of like the dirty side. Dirty side, I mean by contamination, pollution. What about the clean side, which is more water resources?
So that way you can probably see if you have an underground reservoir of clean natural water that you can probably pump up for people to drink, or probably for irrigation uses.
Yeah, very good, exactly. So let's say we put a well into this model here, and it's pumping at a certain rate, let's just say 500 gallons per day, 1 million gallons per day or something like that. And then we have another well that's just a little bit far away from it. We can be able to assess to see how that pumping is going to affect the farmer's well a mile away, or whatever the case may be. So this is actually this is done a lot in the South, in places where there's drought. It's done a lot in Florida, in Alabama, I know too. And so this is an interesting thing. You did get to go out in the field, but then you also get to use computers as well. This is just another example where you can actually see the water being drawn down. And I'm trying to get my cursor over there. There we go. If you can see my cursor, this area right here, you can see this cone. And so that's an indication that this water is being drawn down here. And so this is, again, as I think it was Bray mentioned, this is how we can use this sort of analysis. And then this is a plume. I think it was Amber mentioned. This is a 3D representation of a plume. So if you like using computers and putting in data and coming up with 3D representations, this is a really interesting thing to do. Also, I've dabbled in this a little bit. I'm not the greatest at 3D representations, but I have done it. And then these vertical lines here, these are the wells that they use to tabulate the location of this plume and how it moves in the ground. So these are just some tools that we use out here. On the left-hand side, this is groundwater monitoring. We basically pump a little bit of water up. We send it through this meter right here. We take some measurements, and then when a measurement's stabilized, we know that we're pulling from the groundwater aquifer there, and then we take our sampling. Over here, this is a classic table when you're doing soil sampling. So this thing right here in the middle, what do you think that is? This long thing right here.
Is that a core?
Yes, very good. That is a core, and it's actually in this clear plastic. That's how they remove it from the ground. And so this person right here, notice he has his PPE on, the gloves, the safety vest. Now, does anybody, this is a quiz here. Does anybody know what this thing is right there? This is a tool that we use when we look at or monitor soil. So that equipment right there is called a PID, and it basically is able to sniff for petroleum products. So we use this to screen the core, and then he'll put the samples into jars or bags. All right, so these are just some work examples of what we do, rock and soil logging. Now the phase 1 ESA, we're going to get into that a little bit more. That's where I was saying that we go into a situation, we kind of try to assess where things may be of risk for the lenders, the banks, those sorts of things. I'm not going to go through each one of those because we kind of talked about it, but those are some of the fields that you could go into. This is just a photo here of, again, somebody screening, and then this drill rig over here, it's called a geoprobe. It's a smaller one. It's a direct push. Basically, it vibrates real quick and just pushes this core into the ground. Then they'll pull it out, and it's in that plastic liner, and you can see another example of the plastic liner down here. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is a different kind of drilling method, and oops, sorry, I went too far. We were a little bit slow. This is, let's see if we can play this here. So this is called a hollow stem auger. This is called a hollow stem auger, and basically they drill in. We're not gonna watch the whole thing. I'm just gonna kind of speed it up here a little bit. You can see them drilling in. It's not a direct push. This is primarily used for geotechnical analysis because we don't take samples from this auger here, but instead we take samples from something that's being hammered in the ground. It's called an SPT spoon. It stands for Standard Penetration Test Spoon. And again, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. So here they are putting the spoon in. It's a 2-foot long spoon. And I'm going to fast forward again. I've had to do hundreds of these, and this is the fun part. So they put what's called an auto hammer on the top, and we'll notice what happens. Can you guys see the video? Is it moving? It's videoing? Okay. So this guy at the bottom, he's marking every 6 inches with chalk. And then our job now as geotechnical engineers or technicians is to count how many blows there is per 6 inches. And so the way we would do it, it's going to be a little bit delayed, but we would do 1, 2, 3, 4. And so we would count for every 6 inches. And as he zooms in, you can see those chalk lines here and there. And then after the 2-foot interval of counting every 6 inches, we would write those numbers down, and the geotechnical engineer could then determine how compact that soil is and be able to come up with a foundation plan. Now, I'm going to stop talking and look for a second how quickly this guy's hammering. Okay, he was doing it very, very slowly. Now, from my experience, when you're out and working with these drillers, you're kind of the one that's in charge. Those blows that they were doing were so slow, and the drillers made them intentionally slow. Do you know why they made them intentionally slow? Well, sometimes some drillers are great. Sometimes drillers work a little bit slower, and the reason is because they get paid per hour. And so in this case, these drillers were blowing slow, so that it took a little bit longer to do their job. They didn't have the engine revved up enough to go faster. So you can kind of tell those things just by doing it a little bit. This blow was a little bit too slow. If I was out there, I'd probably tell them to speed it up a little bit just so we can get through the day before we lose the daylight. Now, as I said, it's also about geology, environmental science is also about being safe and recognizing unsafe conditions. This is a video from OSHA in Oregon, And the louder voice you're going to hear is the OSHA officer who has approached this work location. It's an excavation, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. But notice what happens to the excavation.
Who's in charge today?
That's the OSHA
Who's in
worker.
charge today? How you doing? I'm with State of Oregon, Oregon OSHA. Looks like you got a little bit of a shoring problem going on. Well, he can't be down there.
A big truck drives by, vibrates the ground.
You want to see why it can't be down there? That's why it can't be down there. Okay, you got to get him out. And I hope you get him out soon.
Okay, so what just happened there? What just happened to that excavation?
Right?
Sorry, what's that?
The dirt fell back into the hole, right?
Yes, it did. Yes. So the OSHA operator, thank you for that. The OSHA was out there looking at this excavation. Whenever you do an excavation, you need to have that shoring, basically walls going up the side. And if somebody's in the excavation, it doesn't collapse on them. And so he was out there saying, who's in charge? Why are you in the hole like that? You don't have the proper shoring. And the excavation almost engulfed that person down there while they were there. In addition, you can see that they're trying to put this ladder in to get him out. And they're still trying to put the ladder in to get him out. So if there was an emergency, this guy may be dead. And so as part of geology, environmental science, you could also go into this field of health and safety, making sure that people are working safely, that there are safe conditions, because this turned out okay, but if that worker did not move at the right time, or if he was over a little bit to his left a little bit more, then he would have been engulfed and he would not have survived. All right, so this is another thing that we deal with. You can see the heat. This is heating oil. I don't think you guys have a lot of heating oil down there because we primarily use in the Northeast in Connecticut, where I live, to heat our houses in the wintertime. But this truck flipped over, spilled all of these gallons. We need to go out there, clean it up, and assess it. This is one of the heating home oil tanks. You can see it kind of burst there. And so this is another sort of situation that environmental scientists would go out, figure out what went wrong, and then clean it up. This is another one, except this one's outside. Now for this one, what do you notice about the tank? If you were to go out there, if somebody was to say, look, I have a whole bunch of oil in my yard, and you were to go out there and look at the tank, what would you notice? What would be the first thing you notice about that?
It's rusty.
It's
Yeah,
rusty, very good. Yep.
It seems
What
like
else?
oil is like leaking through the tank, and like, you know, either it seems like there's also a crack in it where the oil is like penetrating through and getting down to the ground.
Yes, exactly. So we can see that the tank is rusty, obviously, because it's been outside, but then this whole area here, like we mentioned, that's all oil stained. So we know that it's leaking out of this tank. And right in this area, this person knew it was leaking. Do you see what this person tried to do down here?
It seemed like they tried to cover it up like with some type of plastic bag.
Yeah, exactly. They put some sort of plastic bag right at the bottom to try to catch it. And you can see a little bit of the oil right there. So sometimes people do that. They try to fix it themselves, and it doesn't really work out, and it kind of turns into a worse mess. So with geology, environmental science, one of the things I liked about it is you're a detective. You go out to these locations and you try to figure out what exactly went wrong and try to fix it also. Go out to a site like this and you're trying to assess for environmental risk. What are some things you notice? This one's kind of obvious. What are some things that you would report on back to your supervisor if you were assigned and asked, okay, what's the environmental risk out there?
Everything.
Everything. Okay, very good. Be specific. Name one thing.
The surroundings, really, the empty containers, you don't know what was in them, how long it was there, and you don't know what's under it.
Right, exactly.
And
So,
everything's all cluttered together.
yep. You see these barrels are all flipped over. Now, why don't you know what's in them? Barrels are always supposed to have something on them, but a lot of these don't. What are they
Labeling an
supposed to have?
MSDS.
Yeah, you're on the right track. Not so much MSDS, or now it's upgraded to SDS. But instead of having that, what should they have on them? It's kind of like a summarized version. They basically need to have some sort of label on them so that if we go out there, we know what it is. This place has none of that. The barrels are all over the place. There's some plastic, metal barrels. There's some carboys over here that are unlabeled. We don't know what's in them. So this is certainly a higher risk. This is a photo that I took when I was doing something like that. You see the 5-gallon bucket there, and then what do you see on the other side of it?
Warning label.
Yeah, there's a warning label, and then over here.
Looks like tire or something spelled.
Yeah,
Oil.
exactly. Whatever was in this broke and spilled all over the place. This is another photo I took. We were doing excavations. This is for geotech, but it turned into an environmental thing also. There's a building right over up to the top right, and we were digging to see what was underneath it because they wanted to build an addition to it. And underneath, see all this black stuff here? This is very black and kind of grainy material. Does anybody know what slag is? What is slag?
The subscribers we're gaining per day, and
I'm sorry, you were cutting out. Say that again. Was it Cody? So what's slag?
Is it like a byproduct from making metal?
Yes, it can be. In this case, it's a byproduct from burning something. So in the past, what did most of the United States and the world burn for power before there was petroleum, liquid petroleum?
Coal.
Coal, that's right. So this is basically coal slag. So before this building was built, the landowner probably had an arrangement with some location that was burning a lot of coal. And he said, you know what, bring your coal over to my place, dump it there. I want to build a building. It'll be a nice foundation. So they did that. So this whole building is built on top of coal slag, which is basically like coarse sand that's not stable. And so we dug a little bit here next to it, and all the coal slag underneath the building just poured out and created a huge void underneath the building. And so when you're doing geotech projects, you never know what you're going to find underneath there. And in this case, we found this coal slag underneath the building. We also do some in remediation. This is through injecting. We're injecting chemicals into this location to clean up the heating oil that spilled. This is another excavation I did. What do we notice about the excavation here? We have some brown soil, good, 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 and then we have some black stuff. So what do you think that black stuff could be from, just in general? Is it good to have there? You can shake your head. No, probably not. So we have soil up top. We have this layer here. This is probably the original layer that had a lot of impact contamination on it. Somebody filled some clean soil up here. And in this case, we would need to see if we need to remediate that location. So we're going to quickly go into the environmental aspect of this. I know we're running out of time, and you guys you have some questions that you want to ask. So this is just some of the fields of the environmental education. Now we're switching gears to what I'm doing right now. You can be a public school teacher. You can work at nature centers as educators, park and forest, which is where I am right now, especially secondary schools. Now in Connecticut, in the next town over, New Haven, Connecticut, there's a high school there called Common Grounds. It's an agricultural high school. You go there and you learn, it's a normal high school, but you learn how to do gardening and growing crops, livestock, all those sorts of things. Science museums, and then also higher level coordinators in all of those fields up there. So this is where I work right now. That's the exhibit center. It's a geodesic dome. Now just quickly, over in this area, you know, let me show you one thing. The reason that it's called Dinosaur State Park is because we have a dinosaur track there. Now we don't just, this is one of the tracks that we have there. We don't just have one though. we have about 2,600 tracks, and this is the inside of the exhibit center. We have our walkway. Now, the exhibit center was built on top of these dinosaur tracks that were discovered in 1966. And so we have about 700 inside the exhibit center, and outside the exhibit center, we have another 1,700 that have been reburied out here. I'm hoping to build another facility over it, but they've been trying to do it for 50 years. They haven't been able to do it, so maybe I can do it in the next 10 years. But this is the exhibit center, and so we help people to learn about the geology of Connecticut, dinosaurs living in Connecticut 200 million years ago, those sorts of things. And we also have an outside. This is our wetland area. This is not recent. This is back in January, I believe. But we also have 2.5 miles of trails out there, so we help people to learn about the environment outside. Now, this is a video that I took. Let's see if it plays. This is of our wetland. I was trying to do this this wetland video for Facebook, because that's what I'm doing right now since we're inside. I've been doing a lot of online content. This is our wetland boardwalk. And I just wanted to show you some of the things that we do discuss, some of the macroinvertebrates that you find in the wetland. I don't know if you guys have done this, maybe in some of the water courses in your area, whether it's a saline area, brackish area, or freshwater. This is freshwater. But this is one of the things that I do right now that I'm home. I record these videos and then put them on Facebook and help people to learn a little bit about the environment that they may be missing, because not a lot of people would go over and actually look inside of water of a wetland, or learn a little bit more about the fossils that we have at Dinosaur State Park. So again, these are just some of the things I'm doing right now. And I broke this out. You can scan it quickly. The next few slides just have to do with basically the requirements and the benefits for each of these jobs that I've been in. This is private environmental consulting. It's over 40 hours a week. You have to account for billable time. So basically you have to account for all of your time. That's the salary range, the average, and then some of the other benefits. We also have environmental education in nonprofit natures and science centers. So this is non-governmental, nonprofits, and roughly it's about 40 hours per week. You don't have to account for your billable time. That's the salary range. It's a little bit lower. The mid-year career average, 55,000. That may be a little bit higher than what we have, at least in Connecticut. You can see some of the other benefits, pretty much standard in Connecticut. The vacation time, the vacation days, the personal leave, and so on. And then this is for government working in state parks, federal parks, those sorts of things. It's about 40 hours per week. Again, you don't have to account for the billable time. The salary range is a little bit higher than nonprofit. The average, as you can see there, and then you have the kind of the standard vacation time, sick time, personal time, those sorts of things. So that's pretty much my whole presentation there. Sorry, I went a little bit over. So it looks like we have about 15 minutes or so for questions. So I will stop talking at this point, and I guess somebody else is going to ask the questions that we have.
Yes. To start off, Amber, why don't you choose two of your favorite questions that you asked? Because yeah, I see you've got a lot of questions, and they're all good ones.
All right, I have to say this is probably my favorite speaker so far. So I have to find mine. Can someone else go first while I'm looking for my question?
Yeah, that's fine. Austin just asked a question in the chat box, and I think it's a good one. So why don't you go?
I wanted to ask, how did past positions prepare you for your current job of working with the community is a huge component because that's something we've had to come in contact with because occasionally people come and stop us, ask what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the biggest learning curve was probably when I was 16, 17, 18, and I was working at the Discovery Museum, because there I did weekend lectures, but during the summer I also did summer camp. And so having to work with 10 through 13-year-olds when you're 16, 17, 18-year-old, when you think about it, there's really not much of an age difference. So at least with working with kids, that was a big learning curve for me. And then it was also helpful working with the public at that younger age, because during the lectures, I know that I was talking about, we did the space lecture. It was basically hands-on kind of activities that I do in the front. And I was talking about gravity, and I said, and there's no gravity in space. And this was an audience of two, a father and a son. And the father just said, excuse me, there is gravity in space. And so I went back and said, I don't think there is. And he said, there is gravity in space. And he went on to clarify. So right during my presentation, I had somebody in the audience correcting me. It turns out he was right. And it helped me to realize that I need to get my stuff together. First of all, I need to know what I'm talking about. Second of all, I need to be able to learn how to handle these sorts of situations in a way that does not alienate the person that I'm communicating with. And in a way that also kind of brings respect to myself, but also respect to the organization that I'm representing. So in all of these jobs, I've had to deal with the public, the community in different ways. In the education, it's more children, families, academics, scientists, researchers, those sorts of things. In environmental science, it's more business people and contractors, and sometimes contractors can be very, very gnarly people. And so all of that together has certainly helped me to develop that. So I don't think I would have gotten like these jobs and the job that I have now if I didn't have that kind of line of community engagement that I've had throughout my career.
Cool. Boris has, I think, what's kind of a more personal, fun question. If you want to ask your question, Boris.
Hey, sorry about that. My question was just like, what was like the highlight of your career so far? Like, what's like your favorite thing that you enjoyed while working in the various environmental fields?
You know, that's a good question. And to be honest, it kind of varies depending on where I am. I know that sometimes when I'm in the environmental field, consulting field, I'm thinking back to, oh, this was a great time that I had in the environmental education field. And when I'm in environmental education, I'm thinking, well, I really miss doing this in environmental consulting. And so there's certain time periods that that I kind of, my memory kind of comes back to a lot. And I think it's probably a lot at the Connecticut Science Center and the experiences that I've had there, primarily working around, and it's more of a class, working around helping children and even adults to learn something new about their environment, or to think about something new in a different way. To helping, I did a lot of professional development with teachers, training teachers, and it's helping teachers to realize that you have to give your students credit. Your students are people, not just little kids that don't know anything. And sometimes they know more than you about what you're trying to teach them. And so just not taking the students for granted, those sorts of things. And then maybe in the environmental field, also helping homeowners. I did a lot of work at homeowners to have some comfort or reassurance that this environmental problem at their house will be taken care of, or will be cleaned up soon, and that sort of thing.
Cool. Amber, have you picked out your questions yet?
Yeah, I know one of mine is like a lot of us like to read, and so I was wondering if you had like any of your favorite science related books. A lot of our other speakers have told us like different like biology related ones, but I was wondering if you had like any geology ones.
I actually don't have a lot of time to read books, and so what I do a lot is, and this is not the best way to do this, but especially now when there's something that I don't know the answer to, I'll typically look it up. A lot of it has to do with facts, but some of the books that I've started to read and I'm kind of like in process, basically it's not one, but there's a physicist, his name was Richard Feynman. I don't know if you've heard of him before, but in terms of education, his books are very, very good. And one of the, his attitude was similar to the way that we teach science nowadays. And I'll just give you a quick example. He was describing how he was talking with a friend about a bird, and the friend said, what is the bird's name? And he said, well, I don't know what the bird's name is. And then his friend said, well, how you're supposed to know science. How can you not know the bird's name if you know science? You don't really know science. And then he said, well, I know exactly what the bird eats. I know how it behaves. I know its song. I know how its biology is. I know all of this stuff. That's what really science is. It's not so much knowing the name or those facts, the memorization things. It's knowing about how stuff works and having the ability to kind of think for yourself through those things also. And so his kind of philosophy towards that, he's not alive anymore, but his philosophy towards that teaching is very good if you're interested in science education.
Cool. Any other questions you want to ask Amber? I know, again, you had a bunch in the chat box, so I'll let you have the floor if there's anything else that you want to get answered before it's over.
Yeah. I was just wondering, like, how you would suggest getting into doing, like, what you were doing with the environmental consulting if, like, I only have, like, a minor in geology. Because I know you said you had the bachelor's in it.
What is your major?
Biology, the
I'm sorry.
concentration in environmental science.
Oh, it's environmental science?
Biology with the concentration in environmental science. Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. So, and then you have a minor in geology. So you may actually be able to get into that just with the degrees that you have. So you would want to look online and see what best fits. Sometimes consulting firms focus a little bit more on the biology aspect, and it may not matter though, because you have that focus on environmental science and geology also. So the first thing to do would just start to look on Indeed or whatever job site you want to and start applying for those positions. And you're probably going to have to apply to a good amount of companies until you find the right fit. And it happens. Sometimes in my history, I've applied to I got the first job I applied to. This last time I was looking, like I said, I applied to like 15, 20 different places, and finally before I was able to get this one. So the degrees that you have may actually work, and so I would just start looking online and applying to jobs.
Cool. I think this question, you answered it a little bit at the end when you kind of broke down like the different careers and what they make, but I do know we have a lot of members that are really interested in pursuing education as a career and how that would work. And Haley's question relates to that, so I'll let her ask that. I believe it's the first question in the chat box if you scroll all the way to the top, Haley.
Yeah, I got it. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I was just wondering what, in your opinion, are the biggest pros and cons working in education, and is it a sustainable career overall?
That's a really good question. And it depends on where you're working. So if you're working in a school and you have a teaching certification, all those sorts of things, then it is supposed to be sustainable. And and you're supposed to be able to do that as a career. What's happening though, at least in Connecticut, and I think around the country, is that teachers are not being paid as much as they should be, so they have to work 2 and 3 jobs in order to make ends meet. If you're working in an environmental center, a nature center that's not associated with the school, it may be a little bit more sustainable. But again, it depends on if they're able to pay you a living wage. A lot of times they're not. It depends on the size. If it's a larger one or a science center, then it shouldn't be an issue. And you also want to make sure that you're getting the best for you. So it's not just about pay, it's also about the benefits. So it's about, do you have medical, do you have dental, all those things that sometimes we don't often think about. If you're working for the state government, that is probably, and I could be wrong, it's my own personal opinion. I've been in this position for about 9 months, so I'm still learning things. But if you're working for state government, that's probably the most sustainable and the highest paying area of education that you could be in. Because many state workers are unionized, and so that helps a lot. And generally, because of that, they can't just let you go at a whim. The pay is based on union. All the benefits are based on union requirements, all that kind of stuff. However, there's a lot of restrictions. You can't really do what you want all the time. So it's a big balancing act, and you have to have trade-offs between what they are. And sometimes you work at some place and you're like, you get this experience, and then you move on to some other place that has a little bit more sustainable, it's a little bit more sustainable for you, and that just happens, and you kind of move around or move up. So it's a good question. You really need to look at the specifics of which area you're looking at and then which organization you're working for. I'm sorry I couldn't provide a definite answer to that, but it just varies across the board between the different organizations.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool. Well, we have time for one more question. I can pick one, but if anybody has a question that they really want answered, I'll let you speak up while we have time. Does anybody have a question that they really want answered that hasn't been answered yet? And if not, I'll call on somebody or pick another question out of the chat box.
If no one has one, I liked Carrie's question.
Yeah, I see Carrie actually had a couple of questions. Why don't you ask your questions, Carrie?
Okay. Well, I know that there's a couple people. I feel like there's like half of the people in here interested in education and half in like consulting type work. I just had 2 kind of quick questions, and I was going to email you if I didn't get to them. But the one is like, a lot of us want to we want to make like the larger income, but still get some field time in. So with like the consulting work, was it like 50-50 field work, computer based, or what would you say like as far as going into a consulting job?
So probably for the first 5 years or so, it's primarily 90% field and 10% office, depending on what specifically they want you to work on. In the companies that I've had, that's about what it is. As you start to gain more experience, then they try to transition you into more office jobs. So for maybe the next 5 to 10 years, then it's maybe 70% in the field. And then as you get more than that, maybe it's 20% or 10% in the field. So the higher you go, the less field time you have. A couple of reasons for that. You get older and it's more difficult to do things outside. Also, your billable rate goes up, how much they charge the clients for you. And so sometimes field days can go 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and it would be really expensive for the clients if they had somebody out there that has a billable rate of $100 compared to somebody who has a billable rate of $30. And so I'm hoping that helps to answer that question.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like everybody's gonna get mad at me about this one. But since we're gonna be online for a while longer with our program. We've been having our folks do GIS courses. We found some good free ones out there, and we've also been using Google Earth and trying to get familiar with those type of software. But as far as CAD, we haven't done a lot with that, and I was wondering if you knew of any like free or inexpensive resources that are available for folks like us to use.
Yeah, let me email that to you because there is one free one that I found, but I can't remember the name of it. So if I could email that to you, that would be good.
Okay, I'll follow up with you.
Yeah. And if you do need any guidance or help with GIS, I would be happy to help you with it in terms of software or projects or whatever. I can offer myself for that.
Awesome. Yeah, well, some of our SCA partnership people are trying to get us a free Esri ArcGIS account since Google Earth has got some difficulties.
Well, Esri is good, but it has problems. You can also use QGIS too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of our folks, I created a tutorial for you guys, so hopefully you'll use that, but there's a lot out there. But yeah, I guess so. It's 2:00 now, and we can wrap things up, but I'll ask real quick if you don't mind if I share your contact information with everybody in case they have any other questions. Would that be okay, Michael?
Yes, no problem.
Okay, I'll send that out too. But if anybody's got any burning questions, you can go ahead and ask it. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up for the day.